Here's the polished narration script. One day, they're on your television screen every morning, delivering the news with confidence and authority. The next day, they're gone. No warning. No second chance. Just a sudden disappearance from one of the most visible jobs in America. Some of these anchors spent decades building careers that seemed impossible to destroy. Others were at the absolute height of their success when everything collapsed. But what happened after they were fired is often more surprising than the firing itself. Some vanished completely. Some tried to rebuild. And some ended up living lives nobody would have imagined while they were sitting behind a news desk. So how does someone recover after losing everything in public? The answer is different every time. And Curry spent 15 years building a reputation at NBC that most journalists would consider an entire career. She joined the network in 1997 and became known for serious reporting, humanitarian coverage, and a style that felt authentic. Viewers trusted her. She wasn't trying to be a celebrity. She was a journalist first. By 2011, she had earned one of the most prestigious jobs in television, becoming co-host of The Today Show alongside Matt Lauer. It looked like the beginning of a new chapter. Instead, it lasted only 1 year. In 2012, NBC removed Curry from the role in a move that sparked widespread criticism. Reports suggested the problem was not her performance. It was the relationship between the co-hosts. Lauer reportedly disliked the pairing, and his influence inside the network was enormous. Curry's emotional farewell became a national story. Millions watched as she struggled to hold back tears while saying goodbye. But here's the part that still stands out today. She didn't lose her position because of a scandal or a mistake. She lost it because of internal politics. NBC kept her as a correspondent, but the role never carried the same visibility. The assignments changed. The audience disappeared. By 2015, she left the network completely. She later hosted documentaries and special projects, but nothing matched the platform she once had. More than a decade later, the seat she lost never truly came back. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What happens when years of hard work collide with a power struggle you can't control? Then there's Brian Williams, a man who once occupied one of the most trusted positions in American media. When he took over NBC Nightly News in 2004, replacing Tom Brokaw, many wondered whether he could carry the legacy forward. He did more than that. He helped make the broadcast the most watched evening news program in the country. For years, Williams seemed untouchable. Then everything unraveled. In 2015, questions emerged about a story he had told repeatedly regarding his experience covering the Iraq War. Williams claimed he had been aboard a helicopter that came under enemy fire. Veterans who were present disputed that account. Investigations revealed he had been on a different aircraft and arrived later. Williams admitted his memory had been wrong, but by then the damage was done. In journalism, credibility is everything. Once people begin questioning your version of events, trust becomes difficult to restore. NBC suspended him for 6 months while conducting a review. During that process, additional concerns surfaced about stories he had told regarding Hurricane Katrina. The network ultimately concluded that he had not always accurately described his experiences in the field. He never returned to NBC Nightly News. Instead, he was moved to MSNBC, where he spent the remainder of his contract hosting a late-night program. It was respectable work, but it never matched the influence of his former position. Yet unlike many others on this list, Williams never disappeared entirely. He became a volunteer firefighter, hosted election coverage for major platforms, and even landed a podcast project years later. So was it the end of his career? Or simply the end of one version of it? Matt Lauer's story is very different. For 20 years, he was one of the most familiar faces in America. Every weekday morning, millions of viewers watched him on The Today Show. His presence felt permanent. Then, in November 2017, everything changed. NBC fired Lauer within 24 hours of receiving a formal complaint alleging inappropriate conduct. The announcement stunned viewers. Even more awkward was what happened next. His longtime colleagues had to discuss his firing live on the very show he had anchored for 2 decades. As additional allegations emerged, the situation grew more serious. Lauer maintained that some relationships had been consensual, but the accusations painted a much darker picture. Unlike many public figures who attempt a comeback, Lauer largely disappeared. 4 years, he stayed out of the spotlight almost completely. Reports describe him living quietly in the Hamptons, far removed from the professional world that had once defined his life. Over time, his personal relationships reportedly improved. He rebuilt connections with his children and settled into a quieter routine. Professionally, however, nothing returned. No television projects. No major interviews. No public reinvention. His story remains one of the most complete disappearances in modern media. And that leads to another question. When someone loses a career that publicly, is there ever really a way back? Charlie Rose once seemed like someone who would never face that question. For decades, he hosted one of television's most respected interview programs. Presidents, CEOs, artists, and world leaders sat across from him. His conversations were thoughtful, detailed, and unlike almost anything else on television. Alongside his PBS program, he also co-hosted CBS This Morning, giving him influence across multiple audiences. Then came 2017. A series of allegations accused Rose of inappropriate behavior toward women over many years. The accusations quickly multiplied. Within days, CBS, PBS, and Bloomberg severed ties with him. Programs disappeared. Contracts ended. A career built over decades collapsed almost overnight. The aftermath was striking. Reports described Rose living quietly on Long Island, spending his time fishing and playing tennis while largely avoiding public attention. He later attempted to maintain some presence through interviews posted on his personal website, but the audience was only a fraction of what it had once been. No major television network has brought him back. His story serves as a reminder of how quickly a lifetime of professional achievement can be overshadowed. But surprisingly, one of the most heartbreaking stories on this list belongs to someone far less famous. Steve Kometko spent years as one of the most recognizable faces on A! News. He interviewed celebrities, covered Hollywood, and seemed firmly established in entertainment television. Then a seemingly small mistake changed everything. During contract negotiations, Kometko encouraged supporters through his personal website to write letters to the network on his behalf. Executives later asked whether he had used a company computer to make the post. He said no. He had. That lie became the reason for his firing. At first, it sounds minor, but the consequences were devastating. Kometko struggled to find work elsewhere in television. His identity had become so closely linked to A! News that other networks showed little interest. Eventually, he left Los Angeles and moved to Chicago to care for his parents. There, he took a job at an Apple store. Imagine that transition for a moment. 1 year you're interviewing Hollywood's biggest stars. The next, you're starting over in a city where nobody recognizes you. The emotional toll was enormous. Kometko later spoke openly about turning to alcohol as he struggled to cope with the loss of his career. Years later, he got sober and began rebuilding his life through a podcast called Still Here Hollywood. His audience today is much smaller than it once was. But perhaps his story has become more meaningful. Because sometimes the most difficult comeback isn't rebuilding a career. It's rebuilding yourself. The final stories show just how quickly modern media careers can end. Terry Moran spent decades as a respected journalist at ABC News. Then, in 2025, one late-night social media post changed everything. Moran criticized the president and a senior White House official using language ABC considered incompatible with its editorial standards. The network suspended him immediately and fired him 2 days later. Moran later admitted he had been drinking when he made the post. What surprised many people, though, was what happened afterward. He refused to back away from what he had written. Most journalists in his position might have apologized and tried to preserve future opportunities. Moran chose a different path. He said he stood by the substance of his comments and regretted only the circumstances under which they were written. That decision likely closed doors. But it also earned respect from supporters who viewed it as proof of conviction rather than calculation. Since leaving ABC, Moran has built an audience through a political newsletter. It reaches far fewer people than network television ever did, but it has given him a platform of his own. Brooke Baldwin's story followed a different path. After more than a decade at CNN, she announced in 2021 that she was leaving the network to pursue new opportunities. At least, that was the public explanation. 3 years later, she revealed a very different story. In a detailed essay, Baldwin said she had actually been fired. According to her account, problems began after she moved from Atlanta to New York while her executive producer remained behind. The working relationship deteriorated. She requested a different producer, a move she described as common within the industry. The request was denied. Soon after, she was taken off the air. Then she was gone. What makes her story unique is the silence that followed. Instead of immediately speaking out, Baldwin waited 3 years before explaining what happened. That distance allowed her to tell the story calmly and in detail rather than in the heat of the moment. Today, she focuses on independent projects and podcasting. But like many others on this list, the platform she once enjoyed has never been fully replaced. And maybe that's the thread connecting every story you've heard today. Some of these careers ended because of scandal. Some ended because of mistakes. Some ended because of internal politics. Others ended because of decisions made in a single moment. But the real story wasn't the firing. The real story was what came after. The quiet houses. The small studios. The newsletters. The podcasts. The completely different lives waiting on the other side of public fame. Because when the cameras stop rolling and the audience moves on, every anchor eventually faces the same question. Who are you when nobody is watching? And sometimes, the answer is far more fascinating than the career that made you famous in the first place.